All right. Well, it might be the most exciting time for PFL right now. What's the feeling like just internally right now?
Almost overwhelming
Yeah.
with everything that's going on. Launch of Mina, the pay-per-view model, the absorption of Bellator and 220 fighters. I mean, pretty remarkable. I think we're all scrambling. It's like, holy cow, this is crazy, but amazing at the same time.
What's been the biggest challenge? I know that there's obviously a lot of aspects you're not kind of in, but what have you seen was the biggest challenge so far in the merging of the two?
I think there's a lot of fighters to take care of and get contracts worked out with, and where are they going to fit? And obviously, let's be honest, some fighters are going to get cut. They're going to get let go. Where is everybody going to plug in? What regional promotion? What pay-per-view? What regular season model are the guys going to fit in? I mean, I think that's what everybody's scrambling to figure out right now.
And one of those, you're talking about fighters and all the changes. One of those was Kayla Harrison leaving the PFL for the UFC. What was your reaction to that when you heard the news?
Honestly, I wasn't that surprised to see Kayla go ply her wares and try her hand in the UFC. Let's be honest, UFC is still the biggest promotion in the sport with over 650 fighters signed to that roster. They're a marketing machine. If you want to be counted as one of the best of all time, you're probably going to have to step in that arena at some point, and I think that's her goal. She's set out to establish a legacy in this sport, willing to check her ego from 2 Olympic gold medals and all the other stuff that she's accomplished and put herself in some uncomfortable situations. I think she's grateful that the PFL gave her that platform and the opportunity to make those moves and do the things she's done so far. And this is the next step in that evolution, in my opinion.
And in a way, she's almost representing the PFL because there's not that cross promotion between the two. But this is the closest I think you guys might get to it, kind of showing like, hey, this is our homegrown fighter now. Let's see how she does there in the UFC.
And boy, I tell you what, I like her odds. I think that's a great matchup with her and Holly Holm. I think she's going to do all the things that maybe the previous judo player should have thought about doing instead of trying to stand and bag with Holly. I think you're going to see Kayla come out and establish some ground game, put her on her back, and make Holly fight from there, which is going to be interesting to see how Holly deals with that. That's what I expect to see. I know Kayla, she has no ego. She's going to do what she needs to do to put herself in the best position to win that fight.
When the news of the two merging together, one of the big fights that I've already talked about was Cyborg and Kayla, and maybe Cyborg and Larissa. And now we're kind of seeing that maybe Cyborg's not being utilized, according to her. What do you know, or what is your reaction to kind of what's going on with Cyborg?
I don't really know what those conversations have been like, but it seems like Cyborg is the one that's holding back and not willing to just jump into this merger and everything that could potentially entail for her with both feet. She has reservations, and I think that's on her. So I don't think that we're intentionally not using her. I think there's been some reservation on her side of that table about stepping in and embracing what's inevitable. We've merged. There's no way around that. So.
What about Francis Ngannou? I know a lot of people are itching to see him in the PFL. I don't know if you know anything or can give us any update on his plans or what you think he should do next.
You would think, standing in my gym, and this is where he does most of his camps and his training, that I would know that, but I don't think anybody knows that. Right. Francis is first of all, I think a man of his word, and he has an agreement and a contract with the Professional Fighters League. I think he will honor that contract. I don't think we're going to see him run away from any of that. Obviously, he's doing very, very well in boxing. He's getting paid very, very well in boxing, and here's the light that all these fights shine on the disparaging issue in our sport. Lack of transparency in mixed martial arts. How is a fighter supposed to negotiate his fair value in the marketplace when nobody knows how much these promoters are making off of any one event? And there's a whole class action and all kinds of stuff that are tied into the answer to this question. But I think at the end of the day, Francis is a man of his word. He's sitting in a position to create opportunity for his fellow men and women in Africa, which I think means a lot to him. So I don't think he's going to walk away from that. I think he's going to honor this relationship, he's going to honor that contract, and we will see him back in the smart cage. Whether that will be in June, when I think everybody's anticipating that it might happen against Renan Ferreira, we'll see. But at the end of the day, I believe he will stand up for what he signed and do what he needs to do.
Kenny Florian just recently announced that he's going to take a step down from commentating. I'm just curious what your thoughts were, how you've enjoyed working with him.
Well, I will miss Kenny. I mean, I feel like I'm sitting with two of my college buddies in the best seat in the house commentating the fights, and obviously we love Dan Hardy, and it sounds like Dan is going to step up and fill that void a little bit. I get it, where Kenny's coming from. I think they came back with 4 fights for the season, and that wasn't enough for Kenny. And at the end of the day, Kenny's got to take care of his family and do what's best for him in his career. So I don't think there's any ill feelings. I think we all love Kenny and really enjoyed the couple seasons I've got to work with Sean and Kenny in the booth. And that's going to be different. But at the end of the day, I wish him well, and I think he's got to do what's best for him.
Last year we were standing in this place before the season started, and I asked you, who you were kind of rooting for, who you saw as kind of the star of the season, and you said Impa, which turned out to be 100%. So I'm wondering if you have a prediction for this year's kind of star.
I'm excited to see what Dakota Ditcheva does this season. Coming off of a huge win with PFL Europe, all the skills and an amazing attitude and ability to go out and perform under pressure. And now she's taking a big step up and entering the global season in the featherweight division. There's some very, very tough gals with some solid names already in that division in this season. So that's going to be interesting to me to see how she fares and if she comes through all that. It's a minefield.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
You bet.
Hey Randy, I just want your thoughts on the UFC antitrust lawsuit and the settlement, and just kind of your overall thoughts on it.
Obviously, 3 of the biggest class action law firms in the business spent the last 10 years pursuing this, so there has to be some merit there. We know that they had a tendency to buy out anybody that was a threat or anybody that was being successful in the sport, Strikeforce on down the line. And that's that monopsony that the class action points out in the way they do business. 650 athletes signed to a very exclusive, restrictive contract. There's no transparency in the sport. We figured out the math. We know their goal was to keep the fighters on any given card to under 20% of the take from that fight. Show me another professional sport where that's the case. We have a structural issue in our sport. Not only a lack of transparency, so fighters don't have the ability to negotiate their fair value in the marketplace, but the structure. When you have a promoter who is also setting the rankings and maintaining those rankings, there's a problem. There's a conflict of interest there. That needs to be an outside separate entity that ranks those fighters and holds promoters to those rankings. That's how this prize fighting in the sport is supposed to work, and that's one of the issues in our sport right now. Now, with the global season, you eliminate that. Fighter's destiny is in his own hands. Go out, score those criteria points, make it to the playoffs, make it to the championship. That's kind of eliminated. We don't set the rankings. It's up to those fighters to step in that cage and do their job. But in traditional prize fighting, here's the problem with our sport and what the class action potentially addresses. And my concern is, in the settlement, there's no injunctive relief. We're not forcing the UFC to change the way they do business, which was what the class action set out to do. So yes, great that there's fighters in that class, and I'm in the class. We'll see some remuneration for potential money that they lost in that period by not having a free and open, transparent marketplace. But at the end of the day, we're not forcing the promoters to do business any differently. And that's an issue. So it'll be interesting to see when the courts finally stamp off, because we're all being premature. It hasn't been approved yet, the settlement. I suspect that it will be approved. Will there be any injunctive relief, and will we force the promoters moving forward in the sport of mixed martial arts to do business differently?
Was it disappointing to see Nate and Kung and all of them have fought so hard for this case to go over a decade? They finally get to a judge, they finally get it going, and then within less than a year they settle. Like, was that disappointing to hear?
No, I don't think it's disappointing. I think it's all part of and parcel to this. This is how it goes. I mean, it's going to get settled one way or the other. Do we do that in front of a judge in a court case with a jury, or do we come up with and develop something that makes sense for everybody? I wasn't privy to those conversations. I wasn't involved in that, but I know Nate and those guys, they're fighters. They're not going to roll over. They're not going to give it up just for some easy cash. So I don't buy that for a second. And that's the heat that they're under right now. I know they're being scrutinized because of that. I don't buy that for a second. $335 million is not a drop in the bucket for anybody. And yeah, we can look at TKO and what their EBITDA is and what they're worth, probably about $9 billion right now. So in the grand scheme of that picture, it seems like, oh, this is an easy settlement, a slap on the hand. But there's more to it than that. And I believe in those fighters. I'm not questioning them at all. They stood up for themselves. I commend them for that. Would have been nice to have that kind of support back in 06 when I was fighting this fight, but it is what it is. We're here now, and I've certainly been here all along. So I think things happen the way they happen, and there are a lot of things that are out of our control. The plaintiffs, the athletes, don't have control of this case. Like I said, there's 3 huge class action law firms that have control of this case. So I think if they had their way, there would absolutely be some injunctive relief in that settlement if the fighters had their way. But it is what it is.
Cool, thank you.
We were speaking to athletes earlier who are making a jump in weight class. Do you think MMA should expand, or broader MMA outside PFL? Do you think there should be an expansion of weight divisions, like creating gaps every 10 pounds in the higher weight classes?
I mean, we've talked about a cruiserweight, and certainly I would have enjoyed a cruiserweight division. I wasn't a big heavyweight by any stretch of the imagination. But I think we are what we are in MMA. The weight classes are different, and they don't need to be like boxing.
Yeah.
And I think we enjoy that separation because it's apples and oranges in many, many ways. So I'm happy with the weight classes the way they are. Does it make sense to stagger them more evenly all the way up the line? And why are there such disparaging differences in a couple of them? There's 10 pounds versus 15 pounds. I don't know. It's just the way it worked out. But does it need to change? I don't see any issue with it.
Yeah.
So it's not that big a deal, honestly.
Going back to Francis, what did you make of his performance against Anthony Joshua compared to how he performed against Tyson?
Yeah, well, I think that's a loaded question for sure. I think Tyson was in the middle of a camp getting ready for Usyk. I don't think he took this fight that seriously. I think, he's an MMA guy, until he got knocked in his ass in the 3rd round. And then he's like, oh my gosh, this guy can actually really fight. And I think from then on, we saw a different Tyson in that fight. I think that may have given Francis a little false sense of security of his abilities. Anthony Joshua's coming off a great win, a very, very sharp, distinct win. So he's firing on all cylinders. I think he saw what happened to Tyson, and he's like, I'm not taking this guy lightly. And he came out blazing. And Francis maybe wasn't ready for that. That happens, and I think that Francis realizes at some point now that might be the case, and that he's still got some work to do there. He jumped right into the top at the highest level of some of the guys that are established and arguably some of the best boxers in the sport right now. Who does that? Nobody, and he's done it. So good for him. But I think it also is a little bit of a litmus test and an adjustment in attitude. And like, oh gosh, I still have a lot of work to do here. I haven't arrived quite yet.
You said you'd expect Francis to be a man of his word and fight, potentially in June, July against Henan. Do you think he'll compete again and again, or do you think it might just be the once and maybe retire with the win that he because he probably wouldn't be getting a feel-good win?
Yeah, I mean, absolute speculation for me to weigh in on any of that. I don't know what's in Francis's heart or mind. I know he's an absolute competitor, and he's going to dance with the one that brung him. And guess what? Mixed martial arts is the one that got him in this position to even get these boxing matches in the first place. So I believe he's a man of his word, and he's going to honor the agreement he has with the PFL and do what he needs to do. And I think at the end of the day, he wants to see, talent developed where he came from, opportunities developed where he came from, and he's in a position to see that and make sure that happens.
Beyond Henan, rather than maybe go to boxing, could we lure one of the boxers into the smart cage? Like, there's rumours Deontay Wilder and Francis Ngannou could have fought either in boxing or in MMA.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of talk about that, and a lot of boxers peripherally saying, oh, that sounds great, I'd like to do that. And then they go back and look at the footage of James Toney doing that, and it doesn't go so well. I mean, again, the sports are apples and oranges in so many ways. Everything changes when you can hang on to somebody, when you can take them down, when you can punch them with elbow them. Striking changes, and that's been the criticism of all the boxing guys for years. oh, their striking sucks. Well, you don't understand how striking changes when all these other facets to the sport are included. It's one thing in a pure Queensberry rules boxing match to sharpen and move your head and make the target small and all those things that you do in boxing. It completely changes when you can be punched, kicked, elbowed, and taken down and punched again. So most of the boxers don't recognize it. They're starting to recognize it. I bet James Toney recognizes it now. And that's the truth of the matter. They're different sports in a lot of different ways.
Thanks, Randy.
You bet.
Now that it's been over a decade since since you fought James Toney, was there ever was the game plan to get in there and shoot immediately, or
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have no illusions that I'm a world-class boxer. My boxing is proficient enough to make guys have to wrestle me. And I'm certainly not playing around with a cat like James Toney. His shoulder roll hook is as good as anybody in the game, a 6-time world champion in boxing. I didn't have nothing to prove. What I wanted to prove is that you're in a cage now. This is mixed martial arts, and the rules of engagement are different. And yes, I'm going to shoot as low as I can shoot and put you on your butt and see how much MMA you've learned in 4 months.
and we saw that.
Thank you. Some of the fan reaction is, that wouldn't happen in a street fight if there were no rules in a boxing and it was against an MMA. Do you think the MMA guys would win in street fights?
I think any street fight ends up in all kinds of different positions, and I think that MMA probably simulates that better than pure boxing does. The thing about street fighters is they're generally not trained. Most of those fights last 30 seconds if they last a minute at all.
Yeah.
And therein is the difference. I'm going to drag it out until you get so tired you can't hold your hands up anymore, and then you're at my mercy at that point. So that's the difference between being an athlete and actually training for a combative sport and being in a rage game where you're in a street fight and there is no rules and there is no control. Big difference.
Yeah.
So I think a boxer is going to do just fine in those circumstances because they have their wits about them. They're not going to get upset and angry. They're trained. They're a professional athlete. And the same is true of a mixed martial artist. The difference is most street fights end up on the floor. They end up in weird situations. And that's more akin to MMA than just being able to punch a guy and get your way out of it.
I've got one last one. I was just thinking, with PFL's relationship with Jake Paul, who's fighting Mike Tyson, and from what I've been reading, it could be the most watched boxing event of all time, just because of the
Couple things very interesting about that. It looks to me like Netflix is dipping their toe in the athletics water. This boxing match is another indication. They just did some tennis, they did a little golf, now they're doing some prize fighting. It's very interesting. But let's be honest, it's still an exhibition.
Yeah.
And most of the exhibitions I've seen, these guys aren't fighting. They're not out there trying to rip each other's heads off. When there's an actual title and a big, there's still a big paycheck on the line, and certainly some bragging rights for Mike Tyson. You think he wants to lose to an internet sensation like Jake Paul? I don't think so. I think he sees this as a serious threat in some ways to boxing, and he wants to address that. That's what he said. I mean, he's not one to mince words, so I think he's speaking truth there. I think Jake has finally stepped up and is fighting legitimately. One of the best boxers in the last 3 or 4 decades. And that's a big step up from his last fight with Fury and his previous fights with mixed martial artists, not true boxers. So it's going to be interesting to see how he deals. And if you're seeing any of the trading videos, your butt's got to be puckering a little bit if you're Jake Paul. I don't care. That guy's still got a pop and still can move and punch. So those early rounds especially, man, it's going to be dangerous.
Do you think? Do you think the criticism of Mike for taking that fight is valid? But in terms of his age and his health, a lot of people are really worried about him. Do you think
I'm not
that's
worried about Mike
okay?
at all. I think this has been in the last decade. I've been around Mike. He's done some stuff with the PFL. This is the best Mike we've seen in a long time. Right between his ears, because I think he was struggling for a while.
Right.
And I think his wife and his family situation has all calmed down. We're seeing the best Mike Tyson we've seen in a very, very long time. He's back to training, taking care of himself. I'm not worried about Mike at 59 years old at all. I think he's going to go out there and do exactly what we're seeing in these training videos. He's going to let him fly.
Thank you.
On a macro level, do you think if it was successful, do you think it kind of bodes well for the future of, boxing and mixed martial arts, that there could be more, broadcasters coming to market like Apple TV? And
I think we're seeing a definite crossover in these trilogies and these crossover fights back and forth. James was the first boxer that had the cojones to step into the cage. We'll see who's next, because I think we're developing a strong relationship. I think we're seeing and getting the attention of some of these boxers that say, man, I want to try that. I want to see how I'd fare, because I'm never going to know unless I actually step in there.
Yeah, but do you think that if this event is successful on Netflix, do you think that could lure Apple TV and Amazon to come in and maybe broadcast PFL events, after?
That's an interesting, and I missed that point in your question. Yeah, that is interesting. Yes, this could open floodgates for a lot of other platforms to start getting involved in streaming prize fighting in some various form. And Netflix dipping their toe in the water and seeing how this goes. I mean, this is a huge arena. Yeah. And could be a very, very big event for sure. So it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out.
Perfect, thanks.
Do you think it's going to end up being Saudi Arabia that's going to throw some stupid amount of money to get a boxer to come fight MMA again?
Well, at the end of the day, it is a business, so there's going to be a bottom line, and what's it going to take? I think those are honest questions for sure. The Saudis are certainly doing their part in our sport and in several other sports to build some culture there, to change their image, to show the progress that they've made since the Arab Spring, and I think all those things are positive things for sure. So I'm certainly excited for the PFL and MENA launching, and that new region in North Africa and Middle East launching as a regional promotion for MMA. I've been very pleasantly surprised by the amount of talent that they have in Saudi Arabia right now. There's some very good fighters coming up out of there. Some Dagestanis and some other guys. Obviously, culturally, that's a good fit for them. And they're teaching these kids at a very early age because of this change just change in the way they're doing business and the way things are operating in Saudi Arabia. So that's good. I spoke at a magnet school there. There were more women on those mats for Taekwondo and Judo than there were boys. I was shocked. And things have changed there significantly, and that's all good. It's all positive.
Thank you.